Hello watchers! Have you ever wanted to play multiple instruments at the same time, but by just having one MIDI item? By just playing your keyboard, but trigger multiple instruments instead of only one? In Logic, the audio software that's most used by blind people under macOS, you have a feature called track stacks which allow you to do exactly that. But can you do this in Reaper? And yes, we can. And there are multiple ways to do this, all with their pros and cons, and we will go through two different ways how you can do this in Reaper today. Let's talk no further, let's jump right in. So there are two ways we can achieve this here. The first way is a thing that I would call instrument stack, because we are basically stacking multiple instruments at the same track. And the second way would be called track routing method, where we basically route multiple tracks into each other. But of course, both methods have their pitfalls and we will discuss them as we go along. So let's start with the first and easiest way of doing things. I'm basically starting out with a project with a track which already got a virtual instrument on it, which is called The Gentleman by Native Instruments, I think. It's included in Complete Control. And it's basically just a piano, and I've arranged Twinkle Twinkle Little Star here, a really simple basic example, but with a twist. And I will just play it to you once, and let's see if you can find what the twist actually is. There we go. The twist is that we are not going down to the D sharp, we're going up to the D sharp an octave above. That's basically all there is, but it's actually nice for demonstration purposes as we go along. So what we can do to actually play multiple instruments at the same time here is we can open the FX chain, and that's method 1, by pressing F on this track.
FX, track 1 dialog, list 1 list, VST, complete control, native instruments GmbH, 32 out, 1 of 1.
There you can see that we have a complete control instance on this track right now. And what we now can do is add a different instrument. And we will, for simplicity, just add Resynth here, which is the synthesizer that comes built in with Reaper. It's a stock plugin, it's free, and it's included in every Reaper version. So we will just fire that up and load it as instance directly below the complete control instance here. So let's hit Shift Tab.
Remove button, add button.
And let's enter that.
Add FX to track 1 dialog filter. Combo box collapsed, edit blank.
Let's enter Resynth, which is written REASYNTH. Let's Shift Tab.
List 1 list, VST, Resynth, Cocos, 1 of 1.
There we go. And now we can play the same thing, and we will get two sounds at the same time: the piano and the synth. And as you already noticed, we have got the problem that one instrument is just louder than the other. And that is because of the default configuration of the instruments. So how could we fix that? And opposite to the second method, where we basically have separate tracks for different instruments, here we don't have separate tracks. We basically have one track, and if we change the volume of the track, we basically change the volume of both instruments at the same time. So the difference in volume won't change between the instruments. We would just make the overall output more quiet or louder, basically. So if you want to change the volume of the different instruments here, there's no other way than going through the Osara parameters dialog and change the wet-dry signal ratio. And we have to turn down the wet signal in order to change the volume of the instruments. So we can press P on that.
Context menu.
And we get a menu where we can select between Complete Control and Resynth, the two plugins that are currently instantiated on our track.
1 complete control 1, 2 Resynth 2.
We will select Resynth because that's obviously the one that is much louder.
FX parameters dialog 3.0 ms parameter. Combo box attack 1, collapse bolt plus P.
And we go to the end of the list.
Delta 18.
And above.
Wet 17.
And then we got wet, and we tap that.
Value Slider 100%.
Let's turn that down, shall we?
Edit selected 1.0000.
Let's turn that down to, for example, 10%.
0 dot 1 0 0 0.
And now let's just play and see what it changed. And that's it. The synth is now much more quiet and the piano is more upfront, and we can change that this way, but it's also harder to control every individual instrument. It can be easy if you're really just looking to combine multiple sounds into one, just, change the volume to a fixed value and then you're good to go. That might be the way to go. It's definitely the quickest way to go, but it's also not the best when it comes to configurability. There's also one thing that we can do here. We can use different plugins in between the FX chain to control various things. For example, we can add a filter which prevents nodes from going through our synth and configure it so that will only trigger nodes above a given value, so that some nodes are played by the piano and others are played by the synth. And we can do this almost infinitely because FX chains and Reaper are basically just limited by the power of your CPU. And those JS plugins are really, really low on your CPU usage. So let's demonstrate this real quick. Let's open the FX chain again with F.
FX. Track 1 dialog.
Let's add a new item.
Add FX to track 1.
Let's search MIDI
I. Space.
note
AOTE. Space.
filter.
FITR. List 1 list. JS. MIDI duplicate JS. MIDI note filter 2 of 2.
Instantiate that.
FX. Track 1 dialog. MIDI note filter. List 1 list. JS. MIDI note filter 3 of 3.
And let's see what we can do here.
Lowest key. MIDI note number. Slider 21.0.
And that's the way that we want to change. So we can go from 0 to 127 here, which is obviously the notes that we have available, because MIDI can play up to 128 different notes, which are the notes that are available on our keyboard or within the pitch cursor, for example. And we can set this value to 72. That is C5 if we are starting from C-1. And our piece goes from D sharp 4 to D sharp 5. So we are basically preventing any note from going through that is lower than C5, which is basically almost our entire piece, with the only exception being the highest two notes, which we added in as a twist. Let's play this and you will notice that's not working yet. But why is it not working yet? That's pretty simple, because we have an FX chain going on here, and as soon as we had add and insert a new instrument or a new instance of an FX, then this instance is going to be added to the end of the FX chain. So we have to move this up between our two virtual instruments. So let's shift tab into the list.
Edit mode list 1 list. JS. MIDI note filter 3 of 3. Active.
And there we go. We have to press Ctrl Shift Alt and page up.
0.00.
And this will make sure to move the plugin between our two instruments. Now we can hit play. And our synth will only be triggered, in addition to the piano, when playing the highest two notes, the D and the D sharp 5. And I now quickly just added another instance at the very top of the chain, at the very beginning, even before the complete control instance. And I configured it the way so that we have our lowest key set to 21, which is the default and doesn't matter for our case, but the highest note is set to 72 this time. So we're basically just allowing anything to go through, which is from D sharp 4, which is the note that we are starting at, up to C5, which is basically everything except our highest two notes. And what we probably expect here is that we now have the piano only playing the lower part and the synth to play the upper part. But in fact, we're getting into a bit of trouble here. And we don't get the highest notes at all. And that is because we're working with an FX chain. The plugins that are instantiated on the chain early affect all the following plugins, not just the one that is following right after. So if we filter away the two nodes for complete control already, they are not going to reach the second filter, and they are especially not going to reach resynth right after. So that's one of the pitfalls that you have to be aware when doing the instrument stack thing and stacking instruments right onto one single track. If you want to be a bit more flexible in terms of configuring your different tracks that you want to route to, then you can use the second method. But before getting to explaining, if you're enjoying the content in my videos, please consider subscribing to the channel and follow me on Twitter, where I post regular updates to all the music that I'm making and to the video making process for this channel as well. And now that that is out of the way, let's dive into the second method, which is based on routing. And as I already mentioned, this is going to be a bit more complicated in terms of setup. For full transparency, we are starting with an empty project, no tracks, no items, no whatsoever. Let's create an empty track first and call this melody.
Track name MELODY 1 melody volume 0.00 pane.
And I already copied my MIDI item into the clipboard, so I would just paste this at the very beginning of the project onto the track melody.
1 melody. 1 item added.
And now we've got a melody track with this MIDI item on it, and we can play, but we won't be able to hear anything because we don't have any instrument on this track. And that's actually not what we want, because this track is going to stay empty except for the MIDI part, because that is what we wanted to do. We just wanted to contain all the melody, and we will create different tracks which will contain all the different instruments. So let's import a track with an instrument here, in this case our complete control gentleman again, and you can follow along by hitting virtual instrument on new track. Within the insert menu, you can create a new track with Ctrl T and just instantiate the virtual instrument via the FX chain, which you can reach by pressing F. You can also import it from a track template. Do it the way you like most, it doesn't matter. I will import it from a track template real quick. So I've got a second track here, which is empty, which is called
2 piano armed.
And I've got
1 melody 1 item.
There we go. So still, this piano track is empty. I don't have any items on it. I just have the complete control instance with the gentleman on this track. What we now have to make sure is that our melody track actually goes into the piano track. And that is easily be done under Windows by pressing Alt and context menu key.
Context menu.
And this is the routing context menu. Let's see what we can do here.
Must ascend check 10. Send submenu S.
And then we go into the Send submenu.
Adjust I/O parameters. Right click on volume fader A.
And use the up arrow.
Track 2. Piano T.
And that's what we want to hit enter on. And that's the moment where we instantiated a send from our melody track to our piano track. And if we hit play now, as you can hear, we can hear everything that you want to hear. Let's just replicate this real quick, create a new track which is called synth, and insert resynth in that track. There we go.
3-armed ray synth.
And what we now need to do is we need to route this again. So let's go to the melody track.
1 melody 1 item.
Let's use Alt context menu again.
Context menu.
Go to Sends.
Must send submenu S. Adjust I/O parameters. Right click on volume fader A.
And use the up arrow.
Track 3. Ray synth T.
And hit enter once again. And that's the moment where we have our track melody routed to piano and synth. Let's play this. And now we've got the same problem. Our synth is just really loud. We can adjust this more easily this time. Multiple ways again. We could theoretically change the volume of the send, which is the most complicated way, and depending on your use case, this might be the way to go, but usually you don't need to do this. We could again change the wet signal, but we don't need to do this. We can this time just change the volume of the track by selecting our resynth track.
3-armed ray synth.
And we can just press Alt, Shift, and down arrow a few times.
Track -1.00, -2.00, -3.00, -12.00.
And let's play once again. Isn't this much better? So, Can we now finally do the thing that we weren't able to do with the instrument stack before, where we can have the piano play all the lower notes and the synth only play the upper notes? And yes, we can. So what we now need to do is create MIDI note filter once again on both tracks, and we need to make sure to hit Ctrl, Shift, Alt and Page up so that the MIDI note filters on both tracks are probably instantiated before the virtual instruments. And after doing that, and configuring them properly, we will be able to do exactly what we wanted to do on the previous attempt, but weren't able to do because of how the FX chain actually works. So I've done this real quick so that we can actually demonstrate this. And what I did is I configured the MIDI note filter on the piano for the highest key to be 72 and the MIDI note filter on the resynth to have the lowest key on 73, so that we don't have the situation where both instruments would trigger on 72. If that would actually be what you want, like both instruments at the same time playing C5, then you're free to just do that. You could also do things like instantiate a MIDI note transposer on, for example, the resynth track to actually transpose all the notes that are coming in one octave lower, so that we'd have the piano play on the regular scale and the synth doubling the piano an octave below, which is all possible by that method. So the second way, although a bit more complicated to set up, might be your preferred way of doing things because it's much more flexible. You can configure it easier and you can actually configure more stuff because you have separate FX chains for each and every individual instrument, and you can do so much more with it. It obviously has its pitfalls. For example, if you'd want to actually live play a melody and play it back at the same time, like if you wanted to do things in real time live, you would also always have all the other tracks armed. So if you didn't know that, but if you want to hear something played live or record something via MIDI, then in Reaper you'd need to arm a track, which is done by default if you're using the virtual instrument on new track option in the insert menu. All virtual instrument tracks will get armed by default that way. And there's an option available in every context menu for Reaper tracks, which allows you to automatically arm the track whenever you select it, which is really helpful in the default for all the projects that I'm working on, because this allows me to scroll through my tracks and use my keyboard to play whichever track I've currently selected. But that's already where things get complicated, because if you select the melody track, then only the melody track will be armed. But as we've learned, if you're using the second way of instantiating a track stack, as Logic calls it, that we've just learned about, then we only have the melody track armed. And although the melody track has sense to separate virtual instrument tracks in Reaper, as long as they are not armed, they won't play, even though you're actually playing into the melody track and it's sending data over to those tracks. What we need to do in order to have them play while we are selecting the melody track is arm them manually by selecting them and pressing F7. But as long as you do that, you will automatically record on those tracks as well in the situation that you actually want to record something while the melody track. Although this might sound a bit complicated right now, this might become a bit confusing and complicated. You might get messed up as soon as you want to record something while having your track stack set up that way already. So I'd always recommend you to finish your melody before doing that, or instantiate a separate track, record your new melody ideas on that one, copy it over to your melody track, and prevent your melody track and all the other tracks within the track stack from getting armed altogether. So this was a little overview on how you could achieve something like this within Reaper. There are more ways to do this, and this is the great way about Reaper. You can do similar things in so many different ways, which all have pros and cons, and the one way might be the correct one for you, and the others might not be. There are features like track groups in Reaper which allow you to do the same thing, but are less flexible because you cannot store them in, for example, track templates, and a lot more things that I won't cover here, but if you're interested in one approach or another that I didn't cover in here, then let me know in the comment section below this video. Or if you like this video or dislike this video or whatever, just write a comment below this video. It's good for the YouTube algorithm. You're helping me with the channel, you're helping other people which might be able to find this video easier and might get help out of it. And in the end, we're all going to learn together. Thanks for watching this video. Until next week. See you. Bye bye.